I saw this question in a business forum and I wanted to break it down for you. Here's the quote. I found a laundromat for sale for $360,000. It says their gross revenue is $242,000 and their cash flow is $68,000. Now, that's all the information that I had on the post to go from. So let's assume that those numbers are accurate and that the equipment is in decent shape. Is that a good deal? Is it overpriced? Is it underpriced? What would you pay? Let's dive in. Welcome to Business Buying for Financial Independence. I'm Tim Delaney, and I help young professionals buy small businesses so they can escape the 9-to-5 and take control of their time, income, and future. If that sounds like you, hit the subscribe button and let's get into it. All right, so let's start with understanding what these numbers mean. So the asking price, $360,000. That is what the sellers or the listing broker have it priced at on the market. That's the number that's out there. Like when you see a house for sale, on Zillow, or if you're looking and your real estate agent sends you a house, it's got a listing price. That is what the asking price is. It's the listing price, asking price. That is what the sellers ideally want to get, probably at a minimum, or maybe they're pricing it a little high, knowing that there might be a negotiation to come down. Asking price, $360,000. Gross revenue, $242,000. Gross revenue is every single dollar that comes into the business. Now, in some more complicated businesses, that gross revenue will also be inclusive of the discounts that are later provided. So in some types of businesses, you might be giving discounts for early payment or for bulk purchases. What those businesses usually do is list the gross revenue, so what they would have gotten if they charged full price. And then on the next line, they will list the discounts provided, which is a negative number. And then they have their net revenue, which comes after gross. So gross revenue is $242,000 in this case, which is all of the dollars that are supposed to be coming in. Now with a laundromat, I wouldn't expect that to change much from gross to net revenue. It's a small enough operation where they're probably just counting the revenue as revenue and not getting into fancy accounting with the discounts showing up on the top line. And then we have cash flow of $68,000. Cash flow on business listings is usually synonymous with SDE, which is seller discretionary earnings, or EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Those three terms in a small business acquisition are usually used interchangeably. And essentially what that means is how much cash the business owner is taking home at the end of the day after all typical expenses are paid. A lot of times that number includes some of the add backs that go into the business. A lot of times business owners, especially small business owners, will expense certain items that wouldn't necessarily be used in a operation of that sort. For example, if this particular laundromat owner likes to go to the National Laundromat Conference every year in Las Vegas, because he enjoys going to Las Vegas, or she enjoys going to Las Vegas every year, but uses that conference as an excuse to go to Vegas, that travel expense might not be a necessary portion of the business. Now, one could say, well, yes, it is. It's good to go and see the industry, learn about what's changing and what's up to date in the industry. Okay, so sure, you could say that trip to Vegas is, but what if the seller flies first class and rents a luxury penthouse at one of the top casinos on the strip? Those expenses might not be fully necessary to go to that conference. You could do it, fly coach, stay in a smaller room, stay off the strip, find ways to save money. So maybe instead of a $8,000 trip, it's actually a $4,000 trip. That $4,000 would get added back into the seller discretionary earnings or cash flow as a add back. It's tough to say. We don't know, based on this very non-detail filled post, what the situation is here. But what we do know is that they listed it for sale for $360,000, gross revenue of $242,000, and a cash flow of $68,000. That gives us some multiples to work with. Small businesses are usually priced using a multiple method, whether it's a multiple of revenue or a multiple of cash flow. In this case, the asking price is about a 1.49, 1.5 multiple of the revenue. Take 242,000, multiply it by 1.49, you get 360. And it is a 5.3 multiple of cash flow. So take that 68,000, multiply it by 5.3, and you end up with the asking price of $360,000. Is that a good deal? Maybe, maybe not. Let's get into whether or not those multiples are fair. With a business like this, I prefer to focus on a multiple of cash flow rather than revenue. So 5.3 multiple of cash flow. Is that a fair price for a laundromat? It could be. There's going to be a lot of factors that we need to consider before we say whether that's fair or not. I will say on average, from what I've seen in my research, for a laundromat, the multiple of cash flow ranges from 3 to 5, maybe 5.5, maybe a little bit lower, just depends on the situation. So one of the first things that I'm going to be looking at or considering is how involved is the owner, because that's what makes a big portion of the multiple. And also very importantly, is that $68,000 of cash flow including that owner's salary if they are involved? Some owners will include the owner's salary as part of the discretionary earnings, even though if they were not working in the business, you'd need to hire somebody else to do that, and you'd have to pay them. So not all of that salary should be included in the cash flow number. So how involved is the owner? The more involved the owner is, the lower the multiple is going to be, because that means more work for the buyer. The less involved the owner is, the higher the multiple is going to be. And it's an important thing to remember whenever you're looking at buying or selling your business. As an owner, the less involved I can be, the higher the multiple I will be able to get for the business, because it's less work for a future buyer. What kind of condition is the equipment in? Those heavy-duty industrial washers and dryers and laundromats are not cheap. They cost a lot of money. So are they in good condition? Are they brand new? Are they old? How much service do they have? So if they're a little bit older, they're going to need a lot more service calls. So not only are you losing downtime because the washer or dryer is out of service for a weekend or night, whatever, but you're going to be paying that service technician every time they got to come out to fix something. Sure, you're a super handy person. You want to go fix it all yourself? Great. But you still have to kind of factor that in. And I would do a lower multiple knowing that I have to do more work in that sense. But service technicians are not cheap, and they're getting more and more expensive as there are fewer and fewer out there. So just make sure you're looking at the condition and age of equipment. The newer the equipment, the higher the multiple I would go. Older, lower the multiple. The lease terms. I'm going to assume for this post that the poster was not getting the real estate included with this business. So it's going to be a lease situation. Now with a laundromat, it is very expensive to do a build out on the place. Very often you need to put in bigger water lines, bigger drainage lines. Depending on the municipality and the state and the county, you might need to get special permits for all of the excess water that you're going to be using and draining back into the sewers. You might need higher capacity electricity, you might need higher capacity gas lines. So that build out can be very, very expensive. You don't want to get into a situation where you buy the laundromat and then 6 months down the road, your lease expires and the landlord says, sorry, you got to go. And now you got to go build out another whole place to put all your equipment in. The utility costs and the stability of the utility costs. Are there long-term arrangements locked in with utility providers? You can make contracts with utility providers to fix your gas price or your electricity price over a certain period of time so that you don't have big fluctuations in expenses every month. And just the nature of where you are geographically. Do those things fluctuate a lot in summer, the winter, over time, whatever it is? Just make sure you understand those variabilities. And then the location, the traffic, the competition, the neighborhood. Are you in a high rent neighborhood? Is the demographic changing in your neighborhood where more and more people are going to be buying their own washers and dryers? Is it on a busy road? Is it easily accessible to people? Parking lots or bus lines if they're taking the bus, or walkable? Is it in the basement of a massive building with a lot of apartments that don't have washers and dryers? All those factors kind of play into the multiple. More people, better location, easier access, big parking lot, bus lines, whatever, higher the multiple I would go. If it's kind of out in the country and there's only a handful of people living around there, much lower multiple because, there's a little bit more uncertainty. Like I said, typical range for a laundromat, 3 to 4, maybe up to 5x cash flow for a purchase price, depending on some of these factors. The better the deal looks to you, the higher the multiple I would go. The worse the deal, the more risk, the lower the multiple you want to go. So at 5.3%, or at 5.3 multiple, this would be considered a little bit on the higher end. But then going back to that build out cost that I talked about earlier, you do have to consider replacement cost. This is something that comes up a lot in commercial real estate deals where you're looking at purchasing a building, and value-wise right now, based on the current net operating income, might not be worth a ton, but to go build a new building right next door might cost way more. So you kind of have to factor that in as well, is what the replacement cost is. So if you're going to go start a brand new laundromat around the corner from this one, what would it cost you to get it off the ground before you even have any customers? It could cost, easily 6 figures to do just the build out before you buy the equipment. So you might be getting close to their asking price without even having that long established business, just to start it out. From that perspective, sometimes paying a little bit of a higher multiple isn't the end of the world for a business like that you can't just go out and easily replace. The next step I'd get to is the questions that I would be asking the seller before I decided what would be a fair multiple. So some of those things are, I've kind of touched on these, is how many machines are there? How old are they? What's the model? What's the condition? I'd probably call some of the manufacturers of those machines and ask them what they expect the lifespan is. I'd ask them if they have any service records of these machines. In a lot of markets, there's only a handful of companies that service machines like this. Give them all a call, find the one that's servicing this location, and see what they have to say about it. Just be sure you make sure that you're not violating any non-disclosure agreement when you go and do that. Be careful about how you do that, what you can and cannot say, if anything. So just be wary of that. And are the machines owned or leased? There are some laundromats that lease the machines. So just be aware of that and see what your responsibilities are, how long you're going to have with them, and when you're going to need to replace them. Utility costs, we talked about a little bit. I'd get really detailed. I'd ask for copies of the bills, really double down on verifying everything is what they say it is. You can also use those utility bills to verify the revenue. Most small business owners don't report more revenue on their taxes than they actually get. Most actually go the other way. But if this person knew that they were getting ready to sell, maybe they're inflating the number a little bit. You can use those utilities to verify, or maybe they're hiding some revenue. Maybe there's actually a lot more revenue there than they're claiming, which you can guesstimate based on the water usage, the gas usage, and the electricity usage. What's the rent? What's the lease situation? Just talked about that again. Are there going to be annual increases? Are you responsible for certain maintenance items like the HVAC, like the parking lot? What are you responsible for? What aren't you responsible for? If you have a lease where you're responsible for everything, maintenance, repairs, new roof, new HVAC, then my multiple is going to be lower because I don't know when I'm going to need to do those things. How passive is the cash flow? If he never sets foot in the business, higher multiple. If he's there 80 hours a week, lower multiple. Any other sources of income that the current seller is reliant on, wash and fold or delivery or vending machines, and how do those stack up? Is there opportunity there? And what is the opportunity for growth? You're not going to pay that seller for that opportunity, but you need to ask and make sure that there is opportunity there. One of the things that I typically ask a seller is, if you had unlimited resources, what's the first thing that you would do to improve the business? They say they might have ideas. They might just have been too lazy or didn't have the cash flow to implement them. So what would I actually pay for this business? It's still kind of tough to say. We're still making a lot of assumptions here, but assuming that those numbers are accurate, assuming that $68,000 does not include the owner's salary if he or she is taking one, assuming that the equipment has decent longevity left on it, that the lease is stable and fair for the next 5-10 years plus, and that the owner really isn't super active in it, I could see that 3x, 4x price point for me personally in my situation right now. I'd prefer to be on the lower end, 2.5, 3x, just because there's some risk there with laundromats. Those machines are expensive to replace. I would need to hire somebody to go in and clean in the mornings and the evenings. So the seller might tell me I'm crazy and not have any interest in that. Kind of factors to consider. But that's me in my position. If $68,000 is enough for you to step away from your job and have a good transition and live comfortably while you grow that business, or go find another laundromat to buy, or you're confident that you can run that laundromat while you keep your job, then maybe you're willing to pay the 5x multiple. 5.3 multiple is pushing it a little bit, but maybe you could go up to 5. And then how do you make that deal work then? I'd prefer to be at $200,000 at purchase price. And that's assuming that I'm going to use an SBA loan, which is probably about 9% interest right now for 80% of the loan. That would be about $24,000 in debt payments every year, which leaves me an actual cash flow of $44,000 instead of that $68,000. Because now out of that $68,000 cash flow, $44,000 of it is what I have left after $24,000 goes to debt. The 20% that I put in, $40,000, means that I'm actually getting 110% cash on cash return, which is a fantastic cash on cash return. Unfortunately, with a business purchase, they're showing us the rosiest picture possible. Could I hit those numbers in the first year? Possibly. But I like to plan for a little bit of a reduction in that first year just to be on the safe side. Still a good return at that. So from that perspective, I probably could bump up my purchase price a little bit. Another way to structure that is to give the seller a little bit closer to their purchase price, but ask them to do the financing at a significantly lower rate. So if I paid $300,000 for the business and asked the seller to hold 90% of that, $270,000 as a seller finance note for 10 years at 4%, then my debt service every year would only leave us with $35,000 in cash flow. So I'd be paying a higher monthly fee because I'm taking a bigger loan, even though it's a lower interest rate. I'd be left with $35,000 a year in cash flow. But remember, I only put $30,000 into it this time in that scenario. So I'm actually getting 116% cash on cash return. That's a return on the actual cash that I had to invest. As an investment overall, I'm paying more money. It's going to take me longer to recoup the overall purchase price. But in the immediate cash flow terms, you'd be doing better from that perspective. So those are some options to look at this purchase that could get it done at a reasonable cash on cash return for you. It's probably not enough for people to leave their jobs, but it would be enough to get you started, get you some real cash flow going, and then possibly find a second, third, fourth location to build out a laundromat empire and build in some economies of scale. Now you've got more service calls. You can work a deal with the service technicians, work a deal with the vending machines, all that kind of stuff, maybe even the utilities. If the seller won't budge from that 360, personally, I'd probably walk away. There are other deals out there. Don't feel like just because you found a deal and just because you spent some time doing due diligence on it, that you have to go through with it. There are always other deals out there. So don't feel like you're locked in if it's not going to work for you. Final thoughts on this particular deal. Again, that we didn't have a ton of information to go off of. I just pulled it off of a online forum with those basic numbers. Is a $68,000 cash flowing laundromat at a 5x multiple might be a good deal for you. Not a great deal for what I would want right now. But again, who knows? If the owner really hasn't touched it in years and it's generating that profit, that cash flow for him, maybe I'd pay 5x. It could be worth it. It's really important, I guess, what the whole point of this is you really need to know the ins and outs and all the details of the business before you just make a broad stroke. It's a good deal. It's a bad deal. Even from the basic numbers, even though it's priced high to begin with, I wouldn't shut it out of my searches. I might not prioritize going deeper on it right away. If there are other deals that look on the surface a little bit better to analyze, I would probably spend more time analyzing those deals before I did this one because of that high multiple to start with. But it would probably still be worth digging into, spending some time learning a little bit more about the business to come up with a fair offer if there's an offer to be made. So what do you think? Is this laundromat worth it? Would you do that deal at the prices and with the assumptions that I mentioned earlier? Or do you think this is a horrible deal and people should run and not even give it a second thought? Look forward to hearing your comments. Let me know what you would do, and look forward to seeing you again soon. If you enjoyed this content, please take a second to hit subscribe. It really helps us get found in the future by others. Talk to you soon. Cheers. Thanks for listening to Business Buying for Financial Independence. If you're serious about owning your time and building long-term wealth, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.